Before we get to today's guest, I just want to let you all know that CityWorks Expo 2017 is coming up October 5th through 7th in Roanoke, Virginia. We're really excited about the group of speakers we put together for this year, and we've got a number of exciting activities and additional resources we're looking forward to bringing to the table as well. So I hope you'll take a look at our website, cityworksexpo.com, or check us out on Facebook. And just take a look, maybe get yourself a ticket. We'd love to have you guys down to Roanoke. Or check out the fellowship program, which includes a free ticket, but also has access to a number of resources and mentorship opportunities that we're putting together. So thank you all for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoy it today. And please do give us a rating and review in iTunes or wherever you're listening to this. And reach out if you have any questions. Hope to see you come October. But in the meantime, have a great day.
Please listen carefully.
Welcome to the Big Ideas for Better Places podcast from CityWorks Expo. My name is Brad Stevens, and I'll be your host today. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our guest, Ms. Dar Williams, acclaimed singer-songwriter and author of What I Found in 1,000 Towns. How are you doing today?
Very good, thanks.
Good. So it's interesting to me. A long time ago, I purchased an album of yours, and I never kind of thought that would then intersect with my own personal work and community development. So I'm very interested in kind of what brought you into this world and what got you interested in writing a book like this.
I was having dinner with some friends and one of them said, "Hey, what do you think determines our relationships in our communities?" And I thought, oh, politics, or something like that, something very pointed. And he said, "No, it's proximity, Dar. It's just who's around." And I just and my first thought was, no, that's not the way it works, because people fight all the time. They fight with their neighbors and they fight with their towns. And then I thought, wait a minute. People actually, the towns that have figured out that that's not a smart narrative are doing really fun things. And that is the difference. The difference between towns that seem to be sort of up and running and towns that have a lot of finger pointing and paranoia and crumbling sidewalks and stuff is that people have decided that they want proximity to be a positive force in their lives, that their actual proximity to one another. And so I coined this term, positive proximity. And I thought, somebody should write about this. Somebody should write about this. And I kept on thinking about it. And I talked to somebody, in an interview, because I was so obsessed with this. And it was a music interview. But she said, "I'm interested in this thing you're talking about." And she wrote about it in the article. And then somebody, Sarah Lawrence College, asked me to come sing and speak about it in one presentation. And I just kept on, so it kind of snowballed, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so weird, but I think I'm the person who wants to write this, because I'm the one who gets to see towns in time lapse. I watch them as they're struggling, and then I watch them as they come into their own, and I know I've come to identify what that is that happens, more or less, from my own human eye view.
Well, that brings up this really interesting question that I wanted to ask about. You visit these towns all the time, and many towns I'm sure you've been to over and over again. I wonder, how does your kind of being an outsider help you see those towns from a different perspective?
If you've got an old friend, you know a lot about them. You can go deep. But when you're a stranger, you sort of just see that first impression, the person who wears the purple shoes versus the person who wears the tracksuit, or you get a lot of information right off the bat. And when you're a traveler, you actually need to assess things in a way so that you can find the good cup of coffee, the place to hang out and sit, where to get Band-Aids and things like that. So, you learn how to read the room, as it were, when you walk in. And I think that's helpful. And it's also, here's a funny thing also, it's also nice to be able to come in and see what people are doing right, because they, I think, do see themselves as not getting things right. They talk about this squabble and this sociopath on the town board and all that. But I really love coming in and noticing things that people have done really well. And I think I feel like when travelers like me, other performers, do that, it can start a really good relationship with that town and help that town understand itself as it evolves.
That's interesting. One of the things that we've talked about with several other of our people on the podcast has been this idea of kind of, if you think that your community is doing well, then that will lead to positive outcomes, and if you think your community is doing poorly, that can spiral downwards. Is that something you've kind of seen as well?
Absolutely. It's a very important. It's like a person, if a person is committed to evolving and hearing feedback in a way that they consider to be constructive, they can move forward with that feedback. But if they just see themselves as losers, they just think, oh, that's just more proof that I can't get anything done. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like that. But also, I live in a town who's with the local paper, where the local paper was taken over by the wife of Roger Ailes, who was the former president and CEO of Fox News. And that that whole way of approaching things as, we are divided. Look how divided we are. Look at how these people can't get along, and they can't be civil, and they can't get anything done, became this drumbeat of the newspaper, even though the town is actually filled with really creative thinkers and problem solvers. So slowly but surely, people started to say, at the end of the year, I've got, $300 that I want to give away to certain causes. Should I give that to my community, or should I give that to a national organization? And then they would, put the money out into places that weren't in the community, because they saw, the community as a useless, a futile place to put their energy and resources. So I got to see that firsthand, and we're just turning it around now, as we deserve to, because we love each other in this town.
Well, it's one of the big questions I wanted to ask, is how has this affected your relationship with your own town and your own community?
Well, we had a terrible election, and right after the election, and I was in England when it was all starting to come down, and I was pulled into it, and I was put on the front page as a bad person, a nasty person, and you think that she's nice, but she's a folk singer, but she's actually terrible. And then I got the phone call from Roger Ailes' lawyers saying that they were going to sue me because I had said something about him, and it just was very ugly. But it got ugly all around, and I came home and I was like, wait a minute, I'm writing this book. What would a person writing this book do? And I thought, you go for the lowest common denominator, and that would be the Beatles. Let's have a Beatles sing-along. And the good news is that I made a phone call to this person and this person, and within 2 weeks, we had the sound system, the people who were going to make the brownies, and the people who were going to play the songs, and we wrote lyrics out on poster board, and 200 people showed up, and it didn't change the town overnight. It was just that bookmarker of, we can do stuff like this. We can have fun, and we can meet at the Commons. We can do this. So I applied that. However, it was interesting because the newspaper's constant hammering of how divided we were really makes those efforts pretty futile. And so I found myself saying, we really have to get rid of this newspaper. And people said, are you being partisan? I thought, no, it's just when somebody's standing there with a megaphone calling you a bunch of losers, you really have to denounce that, or else you're not going to, have your festivals and your concerts and your government that works. So there was only so much I could do, and that was a good lesson to learn as well.
Well, it's interesting to me how this newspaper clearly plays a strong role in that community, yet we've seen that in a lot of places newspapers are kind of going out of fashion. So I wonder, what do you kind of think the future of that, who is going to be the common place that we come to for news as we move forward, I guess. It's hard to imagine something replacing something like a community newspaper.
I'm really glad to see community newspapers, weeklies and weekly papers, mostly, kind of fighting back, and they do they do a lot of there's a kind of a way to do it, and there's a way where you, just like a certain kind of coffee shop or a certain kind of bookstore, you're situating yourself in the community to be a gathering place and to be a bit of a booster for your community, even, to celebrate it in all of its small achievements, and to take pictures of the kids. And I think newspapers are really still relevant and wonderful. And I know in my parents' town, there's basically a crowdsourced newspaper, and then these two women who pull an all-nighter once a week to take in all of the different things. But my dad's that town historian. He writes his thing every once in a while, and about 1,000 people are honorary journalists for this, and they wait with bated breath every Friday morning for this thing to appear in their inboxes, and it really keeps everybody in the loop, and everybody hooked into local government in a kind of an us way, as opposed to an us versus them way. It's huge. I think newspapers are fantastic.
That's really fascinating, because that seems to be what it seems to be illustrating to me, is that there's a need for creativity with a lot of this. Is that the old ways of doing things, the old monolith of the newspaper downtown with the big printing press, maybe that's going away, but that doesn't mean that local news is going to go away, or that there's going to be a need to share it. And so we need to be creative in some ways about how we get that news out and how we engage the community in doing so.
Exactly. I think that there's when we were trying to figure out whether to have another newspaper to compete with this with the newspaper in town, and ultimately somebody did that and launched another newspaper, and that has functioned really well in our community. But we had these meetings where we met people from other places, and these guys came down from Woodstock, and they were very kind of earthy, and they would do articles about the sightings of weird animals in their woods and stuff like that. I mean, they brought in some of that charm, and they were charming, and they allowed that personality to be in the newspaper, so that people felt like they were supporting more than just what they would call local news. They were supporting a community outpouring of sorts. And I really loved them. I thought they really got some kind of formula right.
Well, it's interesting, because I think that one of the threads that goes through your book, and I think those of us in community development talk a lot about, is this idea of creativity needing to be fostered and innovation needing to be supported. And I wonder, is that something that you saw across these communities that you thought were doing well? Was that they were really digging in to support people that have new and interesting ideas?
Yes. I'm glad to hear you say that. Yeah, that's what I would. When people could, when there are certain people that are able to, at a certain point, get the megaphone for doing certain things in the community, and they get a certain kind of traction for people to listen to them, and they infuse a community with a certain optimism, and they generate sort of these projects. And when towns value people like that, they tend to move forward. And when those become sort of community leaders, and it's just great to have that person who comes along. I call that a conscious bridger. They like to build bridges, and they like to build bridges across places, across demographics. And usually, if there's something coming in, like a new development, or a big box store that wants to build on some dubious wetlands or something, one of the things that will help them to kind of come in in a kind of a monolithic way is to divide and conquer, and to create a sense of dissent with these creative bridgers, these conscious bridgers. And if the community fabric is strong enough and they really value these bridgers, everything's cool. But, conscious bridgers often have strong opinions and strong personalities. And so the ideal is to find ways to embrace them and not scare them off.
Well, I imagine that a part of that too is giving them support so they don't burn out as well.
Yeah, yes, right on, yes.
Well, I'm intrigued, kind of like, where do you kind of, I know there's some examples in your book, but when you go to these different towns, where do you expect to see these bridgers, or where do they wind up being, or where should they wind up being in a community, I guess?
You'll see them at the commons, what we call the commons, and you'll see that you'll see a person, a store that puts something in its window that reflects where you are. It's your history, your food, your personality, your regional beauty, and like you'll see that. You'll see certain kinds of personalities in the librarian that the librarians will have in terms of how they reach out to the community, and you'll see that reflected in the way that the library functions as a community space as well as a place for the books and a computer. And so basically it's kind of like heat seeking. You'll find a place usually that generates it, like a cafe or a concert series. And then you'll talk to people after concerts, and so they'll, reference this one person who does this and this and this, and you'll say, oh, you have one of those people. Okay. And so you can also see it in the way, in the bulletin boards in town, to see how much stuff they have going on, in how they are doing things in a literal town green in the middle of town, and sort of in the vibe, to be honest. You can feel it.
Well, I'm interested, like, we, those of us that do placemaking work, think about the commons and these public spaces or places where things happen, and you absolutely recognize that. And I wonder, as you define that to yourself, why are those places so important for communities? I know that's a very big question, but I guess that's a good place to start here.
I don't know, but I would say, they say that the natural tendency of the human mind is to drift into the negative. And when I heard that, I thought, that might be true. And I thought, when I look at communities, I think maybe the natural drift of a community is to sadly assume that people are judging you, that they don't want to cooperate, all of these things. I did a community herb garden recently. I came back from the Women's March, and we said, let's do a community herb garden because it's so expensive to buy those little plastic packages that come from 3,000 miles away, and these herbs grow like weeds, so let's do it. And of course, it's just me. I'm just doing it. But I got a really great guy to rototill it for me. And as he's rototilling this plot of land on a church, in front of a church, which is great, so a lot of people, were helpful. He said, people are going to just steal these herbs. And I said, no, they're not. That's the thing. I lived in a little farming community in western Massachusetts. People put out their vegetables. They put out a little slotted container, and you put in your $3. No one would dream of stealing money from those containers. They're just left out there all day. People actually want to trust each other, and they, I think, are really moved and feel generated towards the commons when they see trust, when they see their trust rewarded. They get involved with cleaning up the park, and everybody benefits from the park. And then they want to do the next project that they want to clear off the next sledding hill or something. So when we find ourselves in the commons, it generates a positive feedback loop of trust. And I think if we don't have that, we will tend to see one another in a distrustful light and assume that we're on our own. I always say to myself, never judge a person until you've seen her smile, because people just have such scary looks on their faces when you walk down the sidewalk. And then you say something and they smile and you say, oh, yeah, that's right. That's who you are. People are friendly. People care. So the reminder that of what human civilization can be is in the commons. And the more we invigorate it, the more welcome we feel, the more we put into it ourselves, and and so on.
That raises this interesting question for me that, as my background is in environmental things, and so I'm very familiar with this idea of the commons and how important that is. And yet I think that from my own background in there, that there's this disconnect in some ways when we start to think too individualistically. And so is that some of what you're seeing here, is that really a community or a town that thinks that where the individuals don't think of themselves as part of a bigger entity? Is that part of what's breaking things down?
I believe so. Insofar as if you don't have an example of where trust pays off and where doing things together in the commons benefits everybody, and it's a good way to live. You live your life, and part of your identity is in your town. It's not just in your journal or in your four walls. When that happens, I think it helps our democracy go forward. I think it helps us to be more democratic in our lives across the board. And so when somebody says, look at all this raw sewage and going into this river, this is our river. And, these people have created a little sectioned off area where you could swim in the area, the river, without getting carried away by the tide. Like, they did this really nice thing, but that's our river. So we do care about something that's happening a mile down there, and we do care about that raw sewage. And it's also beautiful, and you know that because you've been there. Getting out into our world helps us to be stewards.
It's for me, there are these questions of, we're in an increasingly digital society where people don't have to leave their house as much or nearly as much as they used to. How do we go about creating spaces where people can run into each other and start to recognize that they're more than just their own entity in and of themselves?
People like each other. So I think that shared workspaces, libraries that have an element of shared workspace where you don't just have to be silent, and really good cafes. It's amazing. People don't prefer to stay within their walls unless they're extreme introverts, which is just a kind of person, but generally people like to mix it up. And so what I recommend is if you're in a town where you feel like there's it's cold to the touch and things are really chilly and people don't trust each other, look into the kinds of spaces that will generate a certain kind of conversation and draw out maybe the first pioneers of social engagement, and let that grow for a while, and or do something like plant flowers in a public space. Get permission from all these curmudgeonly, distrustful people. Get permission to just plant some flowers, and start the ball rolling. I think that people are very proud to live in places with a kind of a cafe society, a kind of a proactive library. They once that ball is rolling, they really are quite proud and excited to get in there.
We'd like to take a moment now to say thank you to our sponsors today. The Urban Affairs and Planning program at Virginia Tech School of Public and International Affairs offers an interdisciplinary approach to understanding planning and policy for megaregions, cities, suburbs, and rural regions in the U.S. and abroad. UAP faculty have expertise in urban planning, architecture, urban design, economics, geography, political science, law, technology, and engineering, and provide students with a multifaceted understanding of how communities grow and change. Students apply their knowledge and professional skills by participating in real-world problem-solving with community clients through project-based studios and applied research. UAP emphasizes technical analysis and policy evaluation in approaching the complexities of modern communities. So big thanks today to the Urban Affairs and Planning program down at Virginia Tech for being our sponsor. If you'd like to hear more, check them out online. But without further ado, we'll get back to today's guest. Thank you. In some ways, it sounds like what you're really talking about here. In some ways, is a slowing down on some level to recognize that there's value in taking a moment to talk to people and recognizing the value of just sitting and reflecting in a place for a little while. Is that something that you've found to be true? That becomes very difficult when life gets fast and we're moving all the time.
I think what I've discovered, yes, but at the same time, the idea of, if somebody said to me today, Dar, you just got to slow down. I have this huge list of things I want to do today, and I'm really excited, and they align with my interests, and they'll bring me into the public sphere and into my job. And so if somebody said, can't you just slow down, that's not going to happen. But because I have so many friends here, and because I have so many, and because we have this really great grocery store, and I'm going to run into somebody I know online, and we're going to talk to each other, I will be slowed down or I will be brought into kind of a human pace by my community, and it will all come around. That information will help me. I will learn about, something where I can bring my kids, or, a new kind of umbrella. Like, you learn a lot from being on the ground with your neighbors. I think at its best, a community will slow you down without you're actually saying, oh, look at me, I'm moving so fast, I have to slow down. I think by the time you realize that, you're moving so fast, you don't even know where to start.
You mentioned shared workspaces earlier, and as someone whose day job is to manage a co-working space, I certainly, it can be frustrating to be slowed down by those around me, but at the same time, I always appreciate a conversation with a member when that's over.
Yeah, there's one guy is now the police chief of Burlington, Vermont, Brendan, and I was working on a song, and it wasn't coming. It started to come, and Brendan sat down, and I was like, oh, no, don't talk to me right now. And we had a conversation that has stuck with me. That was 10 years ago, and he was talking about policing, and he was talking about, going to Dartmouth and deciding to become a cop instead of a financial advisor, and he told me stuff about our community that was just, everything about that conversation was really valuable. I would not have said, I just have to go out and smell the roses and talk to people. I wouldn't have done that, but Brendan, that was awesome. So yeah, I think my experience is, if a community can do some heavy lifting for you before you get into it, if the park benches are there, or not the park benches, but the activity that involves park benches, because God knows park benches can be empty for a long time. And you kind of have to get out into that space because it's inviting you in a certain way. Then suddenly your life has that balance.
That's very interesting, and I'm going to have to ponder on that for a long time. But to kind of switch directions a little bit, one of the sections in your book, you focus on identity, and I really wondered how. I think you're absolutely right, and I think it goes back to earlier we were talking a little bit about narratives and how if you think you're doing well, you'll be doing well. But I wonder, how do you, in a society like you mentioned earlier, where we're being told all the time about how divided we are, how do you go about creating a shared vision or a shared identity for a community?
One of the most important things I learned from somebody, she said, I created something because I wanted it in my community. She said, start with yourself, start with your self-interest, and create things that you would want to see in your community. And so she added something onto what I was already seeing, which is that you're going to have a history buff. You're going to have a foodie. You're going to have people who have these sort of interests, and they move to places because of their something that draws them there. Yes, you can go to a place that is close to the highway if you need that highway, but generally you're going to look at the trees or the feel in the air or the river, and you're going to say, this is where I belong. I have a friend here, he's a songwriter, who literally moved to our town because he saw it in a dream. And then he came to the town and he said, oh, this is the town I dreamed about. People have a pretty deep poetic connection. So identity, I call it identity building projects, things that you can start with the lowest common denominator, but things that interest you in your community are places where you can put your energy, as opposed to saying, I want to be a person who slows down my digitized life, or I want to be a person who, the community member who loves and believes in peace and harmony. Like, I don't think that works. So, but if you want to, let's say you just read T.C. Boyle's World's End, which is a really brilliant book, and it takes place, some of it, in our town, Cold Spring. And you think, what could I do to commemorate this? Maybe I'll go online and I'll just get a whole bunch of used copies of it, and I'll make a little kiosk or something and stick it down by the river with, and you see if I can, or maybe we can have a T.C. Boyle party, where we something like that. Like, start with what is interesting to you, but that is of a very specific, world that you're in, that can't be replicated somewhere else. And, we have blue crabs here in the Hudson River. You could celebrate the blue crab. We have eels, which I don't recommend celebrating because they're so gross. But, there was a town that had seals that would come up the Hudson River and at a certain point of the year. And I thought, wouldn't that be so great if they had some kind of festival around that time to celebrate the return of the seals? It's a sign of the health of the river. It's a beautiful sign. So people who do things to celebrate and kind of wake up the little parts of their town, or the big parts, but it usually starts little, have had a great success in engaging a sense of fun. And kids love it. Like, the kids grow up with a sense that they come from someplace, and it's very valuable.
It's, I grew up in a very rural community where it was easy kind of to have some of these conversations, and we knew, like you mentioned, the seals or whatever it was that was interesting for us. And, we all gathered around the fire station. And I wonder, kind of, as communities get bigger and you have more and more things that go into them. So I'm thinking, here in Roanoke, we have, like many cities, we have quadrants, and those quadrants, I think if you live in them, you have a very different experience of what Roanoke is. And so in a bigger place like that, do you think it's possible, or do you need to break it down into smaller levels, or how do you go about kind of having those conversations?
That might be a question that I would ask you, because you might have a better, my overview, my very general sense is that quadrants and wards, they have wards in Milwaukee, and they certainly have these neighborhoods in New York City that are pretty well identified. It's great. If I want to live on the upper east side of New York City, I'll see women with poodles and women in, matching tracksuits with their daughters and matching nose jobs, and, like all those, you'll really see that. But on the Upper West Side, you'll see like an old guy with a ponytail who's still kind of plotting the revolution. And so you go to places that you feel are like you, and that, I think that's healthy. But then if there are bridges between them at all times, things that somehow bridge between those two worlds so that you're not balkanizing. Balkanizing is an excellent word, and it just means becoming sort of these factions that keep on self-reinforcing and becoming more other to other places. That's a huge waste of potential to balkanize.
Well, yeah, so that's where, as you mentioned, those bridges really come into play, and that if you have people in your community that can stand up against the division and say, no, we actually have more in common than we think, and that we have that these are activities we can engage in together, that's where that really comes in handy, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's not that I think in their hearts spiritually they believe that there's much to be gained from, finding one another. But the other thing they will do is just, in my town I thought, oh gosh, okay, what other lowest common denominator do we have that everybody can agree on? And we are really obsessed with tomatoes. And that just unites a lot of, we're all trying to grow them. We're all snobs about them. We know the paste tomato from the cherry tomato. And so I thought we could have, so what's great about Conscious Bridgers is that they will tend to look at what is the bridging project, or the bridging sign, or literally the bridging bridge. And Roanoke has a pedestrian bridge over its railroad tracks. And that's the kind of thing that I walked into Roanoke and said, okay, a city that knows to have that, among other things, I saw a beautiful mosaic, I think, of a Pullman porter in front of one of the shopping areas, and, the history, the things I saw that Roanoke was doing that was for all of Roanoke, connecting all of Roanoke, seemed like signs of health to me. And so literal bridge signs, festivals, weird people who, yes, figure out how to, like in my hometown, there's an interdenominational, an interreligious panel. So all of the religious leaders get together and talk about the community together, as opposed to going off into their own places and becoming pretty balkanized. I mean, it was when I was growing up. There was a lot of division, but now they all come together and talk about the community. And one of their latest projects was to advocate for a mosque, because they really wanted to make sure that the community was ready to receive this mosque and to facilitate the zoning and, making it happen. So interdenominational, interactive, cross-disciplinary, all that stuff. Those are very useful institutions as well.
And this kind of gets into your idea of translation that I think you mentioned as kind of the final third of the book, where I think, I see a lot of that as communication, but there's an added level to it, is there not? And so I wonder if you could kind of articulate how you understand what that translation idea means.
I think translation gets to some of the things you were saying about people really choosing to be in the commons, people choosing. So on the one hand, I say, look, we're not hippies. Find something, find what you love, the seals, the tomatoes, those things. But on the other hand, there's the decision to translate yourself, the decision to get out and do something in your community that's interesting to you, so that you can, because you have a faith that meeting other people will be positive for you and for your family and your, and for the greater good. That's what I call translation. And that can be a very personal decision that people make. But other examples of translation are when some of these bridges are already in place, like if there's stuff that's going on in the town that pulls out the energies of the college at town. So there's a two-way street of communication, and then you get the best of those college resources, but the college kids get to see, the real world at work and not just be off to the side. That's translation too, when certain bridges are already in place. I think signs are really important, just good signage, and good media, and volunteer radio stations and things like that. I won't give up on local newspapers. I think that they are really, really useful. And if there can be any kind of synergy of newspaper and, radio and all that stuff, people really benefit from those outlets.
It's as you mention all these different things. It's interesting to me that there many of them I think a lot of people would consider small things. You know, even a newspaper, but you know, an herb garden or community sing
Hmm.
along, or you know, even you know concerts and things like that, festivals. These are all relatively small scale things, but I think that you would argue that they indicate larger trends in communities. Is that an accurate portrayal?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, they are. Um, like I went to Keene. One of the first places I saw this phenomenon of positive proximity was at an opera house in Keene, New Hampshire, and they had renovated the opera house, which always means the dressing room is not heated. That's like the last thing they do. But aside from that, they're really excited and usually kind of still a work in progress by the time the first concerts come in. And when I went in, they were talking about landscaping projects and a little local store that had come in, but they were really supporting it and stuff like that. And I just thought, you're so excited about such little stuff. But now I understand that it is everything. And like the Seegers, Pete and Toshi Seeger, created a river. They one of these cordoned off river things in the river so that people could swim there. And when they about 10 years ago, I thought, oh, that's nice. I think of Pete as someone who could, go out and do a very robust, big, splashy thing, nationally or regionally, and he has done that. But I realize now he was creating access for a community to swimming and to making the best use of this park, and really, really equalized and harmonized a lot of his town, Beacon, and allowed affordability and communication to happen. It was the smartest thing he could have done with his time and resources, and Toshi as well.
Well, I'm kind of intrigued that during all of this, and I don't remember much of it from the book, although I may have missed some, but there hasn't been much talk from you about the role of government in this. And I wonder if you think this is really solely the place of individuals to kind of embrace and create these communities, or where do you think the government can or should play a role in these conversations?
I'm glad to, I'm glad you asked, because I'm not a libertarian. I'm a big believer in local government, and it's what's interesting is that people who disparage federal government or state government, I think, well, then you should really get involved with local government. But it's sort of this blanket anti-government thing. But if you really want to get involved with the things that allow your town to be resilient and self-determining and efficient and benefiting people and making the best use of tax dollars, then get involved. Because when government is when people engage with government as opposed to just blaming government, then they really are watching and saying, why did you do this? Why did you do this? Let's do it this way. And better people run for government when they get a sense that it's an engaged process. And leadership, once you have a certain fabric of positive proximity in place, it will allow government to do what it does best. Because if you're involved with projects and if you're involved with, generally being a town that's engaged with itself, you're going to have to, at some point, get your permits and know who to talk to and find out what the codes are for safety or for historic integrity, of architecture and things. You're going to find yourself in it, and you're going to see that it's your neighbors, and you're going to think, wow, you are such nerds. Thank you so much for missing dinner to talk me through why I can have this brick facing for my chimney and not that brick facing. And, what you'll learn is that people get really deep into stuff and they care deeply. And you'll understand that the reason that you live in a beautiful place with, lovely houses and a certain kind of, historic integrity to the architecture is because there are people who go every third Wednesday of the month and talk through with people what the codes are, so that you have a certain look about your historic town. So no, I'm a huge. My belief is that government is part of the positive feedback loop. That once you understand that you live in a place and that you are the stewards and that you are the celebrants and that you belong and you are valued, there will be spillover into saying, okay, now I'm going to run for this office because that's the best use of my energies in this town. We've really folksy, deliberate, smart, friendly people on our town, our village board right now. And it's great.
Yeah. What a compelling. I completely concur with that and think that everyone should get more involved in local government. So let this be the rallying cry, I suppose, in some ways.
I mean, it's scary because, they do say you have to have a thick skin. I don't think you do. I think it can be rough, to hear someone say rough things about you. So someday I think I'm going to run for mayor of my town, but I'm not, there yet.
Fair enough. Well, as we kind of get towards the end here, I wonder, as we kind of close with a couple of questions, I wonder if you could share kind of what the biggest thing you learned along the way was, or the biggest thing that you didn't expect to learn as you were going through the process of writing and exploring these towns.
The two things that I got out of the book were what I mentioned about Jen in Middletown, Connecticut, saying, start with your own self-interest. I thought that was really helpful for her to say, create the thing that you want to see in your town, or help create the thing you want to see. And the other thing I learned was from this guy who says, well, you got to manage change. And I just thought, I think that's a silver bullet word, in that you're not going to reject it and you're not going to just embrace it. People who just shrug and say, the only change is constant, let's just embrace it. That's not going to work either. You have to see it coming down the pike and know that there will be some management of that change, or yes, it will come and feel like a lot of cucarachas, like a lot of, in my town, we have all of these young hikers and coming into our town, and we don't have good signage because people, don't know what to make of them. And there's not a lot of engagement with the downtown commerce yet, except with the store owners who have figured out how to engage the consumer side of these young hikers from Brooklyn who have a consumer side. And so that idea that you manage change, I thought was beautiful. And you don't have to manage it exquisitely. You just have to know that you're going to be called upon to figure out this thing that's coming. And I saw these two hikers and I drove them I heard them say, I think there's a cab here. And I thought, nope, there's no cab that's going to take you to that hiking mountain that's, a mile and a half away on this 95-degree day. And I pulled up alongside these kids and I said, if you come into my car, you're not going to, dispose of my body later on in the day, right? No. I said, this isn't, I said, because there's no cab, and I'm sorry that we don't have a better way for you guys to get to the trails, but let me drive you there. And they were lovely. Their names were like, Jordan and things like, those kinds of names. And we had just a nice talk, and I said, we really love having you in our town. It's just we don't have the signs or the transportation or the infrastructure in place to, welcome you yet. But little by little, we are figuring out how to get more train stops at the trailhead itself, and how to create the signs, and even how to create the welcome, so that after they hike, they can come back to our town and have a coffee or a beer. And so, but we really have to start by saying, these kids are going to come no matter what. Do we want them to die of heat exhaustion on the side of the road, or do we want to actually create a system that that is who we are now? We are a destination for people, so let's manage that.
Well, that is, I really like that as well. I can see why it stood out to you. Well, I wonder if, to kind of wrap us up, you can share a story that you think encapsulates a community working well, or something that about how communities should work, I suppose.
There's actually to respond to your question earlier. There's a great town that I wrote about, and it was the original town where I just dug in, and this is the example. There's a town called Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, and that was a great combination of leadership, government, and certain kinds of personalities working together in such a way that at the end of the day, you're not sure whose fingerprints are the most on it. They were totally down in the dumps along with the rest of the Rust Belt. A steel mill went down, and the whole town went down. But Pennsylvania has this thing where they assign Main Street managers, borough managers, town managers, city managers to your town, and that's a job that is allocated, and it's paid for. It's outside of the government, working with government, and so they have a borough manager who is, I thought he was going to be Merlin because their town has so many cool things going on. And he's just, I've sat down with him and he's like, well, when we do the Firebird Festival, I have to clean out the culverts to make sure that they don't have too many tree branches in them, because then the water from, will get stuck and it'll turn to ice, and you got to get down the tree limbs so that they don't burn down with the Firebird. And he was going that night to a meeting to deal with the issue of gum. Like, there was so much gum, not gun, G-U-N, G-U-M, like mother. And then he's like, we do these benches and we have these nice sidewalks and there's gum everywhere, and we've got to figure out how to get rid of this gum. So, he's so into those details of the everyday that everybody else can dig into the identity of the town. And they just use every single resource. They have a river, and they have kayaking and canoeing and a river walk and all of the things you can do along the river. They have a Firebird Festival because it's Phoenixville. So they build this huge Phoenix every year. It takes 3 weeks, and everybody from the community, it's like all walks, participate. So they're all talking to each other and meeting each other. They have a senior center that's close to downtown, so everybody talks about how important the seniors are in that community. And they have a lot of fun. They just have a ton of fun. They have festivals. They have a beautiful vaudeville theater that's filled with movies 360 days a year, and a history center that's very active and alive in town. So now that they have a huge development coming in, they're looking at the developers and they're saying, okay, this is what you're going to do, and this is what you're going to do. And they're in complete conversation with the developers about how the developers will help the town with the units that they're building. And they have new people coming in, and they say that's perfect because they'll come to the movies, and they'll support all of our restaurants and our cafes and help us build our Firebird. I just love watching that. And I say to people, do you like living here? And they're like, do I like living here? I love it. So it's really been an example of what a town can be. I think those people will consider themselves to be from Phoenixville in a way that will inform their overall identity in their lives, not just their jobs or their immediate families. Their town is part of who they are.
Well, that's such a compelling story to end on, given the diversity of things needed to make that happen, and then the intricacies, but also the big picture that kind of represents. So, well, for those of you all interested, Dar, where can they find out more information about the book or more information about you?
Well, I have a website, and it's mostly about my music, but we're making the transition. I have some homework to do, but they can come to the website. It's just Dar Williams, and I'm going to be in Roanoke, and I'm going to in December with the book, and I'm really excited about that. So I'll be around and about with the book this fall, all over the United States.
Well, yeah, so listeners, take a look at Dar's schedule and see when she's going to be somewhere close to you. I think it'll be a great time to get out. I certainly know we're excited to have you down here in Roanoke. But thank you so much for taking the time today, Dar.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you for listening to the Big Ideas for Better Places podcast today. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave a rating. It really helps other people find out about our fascinating guests and find the information that we have to share. Lastly, please save the date for our upcoming event, October 5th through 7th in Roanoke, Virginia, and keep up to date by following us on Facebook and checking out our website, cityworksexpo.com. That's cityworksexpo.com. Thank you guys again, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.